come to looking at what drives gender equity, both in terms of policy adoption and policy implementation. And we are looking at two policy areas. So we are looking at adoption of domestic violence law in 4 different countries and implementation of that law. And we are also looking at access to girls' primary education and implementation of the policies around education. And our emerging findings actually show that there are pretty good links between, when you take the political settlements lens to examine how gender equity policies are adopted and what gets implemented or what doesn't. And also there are variations in terms of what matters most in different political contexts. In the dominant party types, it's basically your executive matters, so your president matters, and the ideological commitment or the need for the president to secure the support for a particular reason of the women's movement or the pro-women's coalition. That matters, and that's what motivates them to take up certain issues. And once the executive is in the bag, it sort of is easier to offset opposition and align the interests of the bureaucracy to address what the key dominant player is wanting. Whereas in the competitive clientelist context, it is the bureaucracy that comes out as very important. I mean, the policy coalition's role is important, but the actors they're interacting with is the bureaucracy itself. And it's the women's ministry or basically your particular implementing agency that becomes the key player in that context. And there is a higher degree of mobilization that's needed in the competitive clientelist context than if you look at in the dominant party models, and perhaps more space for the pro-women policy coalition in the competitive clientelist context to contest certain issues, raise certain issues than in the dominant party context if your key player is against certain issues. For the civil society and the women's movement itself, when we were doing the research and we were interacting with the policy coalition, and the women's movement were a large part of that, particularly for the domestic violence law. And it was very useful for the kind of feedback we got with them, the kind of questions we were asking, because 2 of our countries, Uganda and Bangladesh, had done their power mapping exactly the way we would do mapping for political settlements. Who are the key actors? What are their holding powers? How is it changing? Actually, they did that. And it was very exciting for our interviewees to be able to link up and say, oh, there is an academic basis to this. And it got them to question how they had gained momentum at certain points, how had they negotiated, what do they need to do now. And that's what came up when we had the big dissemination event in Uganda, in Kampala, actually to see people from the women's ministry, people from women's movement, the lawyers, other actors sitting there and discussing what did it mean and where do we go from here, from now. In Bangladesh, I've had the interviewees ask for their transcripts back. They're eagerly looking for the report, the working paper to come out. But they also said that, look, we employ these strategies, but we don't have the resources or time to record and reflect on what happens. And we only know bits of the story of what we were part of, and our other partners know other bits of the story. So we don't see it in its entirety, and they're very excited about that. So there's a lot of learning coming from there for the women's movement actors. So we're very excited.